Greetings to everyone. I'm Larry Ward. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm currently near Encinitas, California, in the lands of the Kumeyaay people. Today, I want to share a little bit about the background of Buddhist teachings that have been a constant companion of practice and reflection for me as I wrote America's Racial Karma. But first, I want to begin with a poem for you. Maybe it's because I'm 70 years old. Maybe it's because I'm young and I see the Alpha and Omega of all things. I say that each of us is called to shake the temples of heaven and earth as we reconstruct the sanctuary of our hearts. Fill this sanctuary, however small, however mundane, with the thunder of fierce equanimity, the wind of compassion, the fragrance of true justice, with the elegance of joy, with the grace of bravery and the sweetness of love. Remember, no birth and no death hide in all phenomena, including all things that come into the experience of our body and our mind. Be not afraid, flee not, despair not, but fall deeper into the depths of awakening of your own precious humanity and stand up in the house of belonging. The Buddha Dharma is a path with a body of wisdom, teachings, and practices that is vast and deep and wide. But it is also a living energy available in every moment of our awareness, at our life at every stage, to help us come home to ourselves and to gather the present moment of our existence in awareness, close to us, where we can look deeply at our individual and collective life, our individual and collective pain and possibility. The task for us as practitioners is stated well in the words of Thich Nhat Hanh and others before in different ways. The task of being a human being at this moment is to free ourselves from the illusion of a separate self. Actually, Einstein has a great quote about this, of finding ourselves in a prison of a small identity, a small understanding of what it means to be a human being, and that we must free ourselves from this prison. For me, the teachings on the 3 doors of liberation were an underlying part of my practice and continued study and reflection as I crafted this book. And those 3 doors are the doors of emptiness, or not self. The second door, signlessness. And the third door, aimlessness. I just want to say a little bit about those 3 doors and their relationship to America's racial karma. For emptiness, which a lot of people have confused as the absence of things, which for me and in the teaching really is about the fullness of things, that all of life is in me. All of life is flowing between us all at all times. Thich Nhat Hanh's word for this is interbeing. His words, when we realize we relate to all things, we can begin to have perfect communication with them and learn to live in joy and ease. But our rationalized consciousness, which reifies essences in people that are not there, attributes in people that are not there, this portrayal of a separate self. Race is one of the most successful constructs to separate us. And so the practice of emptiness, the practice of looking deeply into how we're connected, both in terms of our mirror neurons, to look at it neuroscientifically, but in the aspects of our social, economic, and cultural existence, we are wired together. We cannot escape our connectivity. I think the pandemic, as we call it, is a profound example of our illusions and our response to it, reveal our illusions of separate self. We somehow think that the pandemic reads maps. We somehow think the pandemic understands what a nation is, or what a state is, or what a county is, without understanding the interbeing nature of this virus. It is planetary, irregardless of what we think, how we vote or don't vote. It is a true experience of our emptiness, our connectedness to one another. And to think this pandemic can be solved in one place without solving it everywhere is an example of this great illusion of being a separate self, whether that separate self takes the form of race or that separate self takes the form of a nation, etc. The second door, which really America's racial karma focuses in on, is the door of signlessness. To enter this door is to enter a door in which we are not confused by the outer appearance of things. And if there's anything in history in relation to this book that is a profound example of what it means to be caught in signs, is race. We know genetically, scientifically, that skin tone makes up a small part of human DNA. And yet race is a gigantic, monstrous category of suffering, of ill will, of greed, of hatred, and conceit. This sign of race is a profound example of what's happened over the last 500 years with our colonialized structure of human value, based on a hierarchy of skin and bodies, provided and supported by the notion of whiteness and the scheme of economic, political, and cultural wealth building and domination. If we do not learn to look deep into what we construct as human beings, we will fall victims to the suffering of our own constructions, which for me is an example of our racialized consciousness. When we realize signlessness, which is a daily practice, a daily realization, we are no longer caught in form. Forms exist. Form is a wonderful thing, but the practice is not to be confused by form. The practice is not to cling to form. The practice is not to grasp after form or be attached to form or only understand ourselves as form. When we are both matter, yes, we are matter, but we are also energy as a human species. And when we're no longer attached or caught in the prison of form in our perceptions and in how our nervous system is wired to interact with one another, we can transcend. Doesn't mean forget or deny, but we can be free from the conditioning of our racialized consciousness that posits a separate racial self, different from the rest of life. The third door is the door of aimlessness. It's Thich Nhat Hanh, like to say the modern world is a world of running, of rushing. We lived in Taos, New Mexico for a couple of years, and we just relocated to California. And Taos is a town of 8,000 people, small roads, hilly, mountainous, but slow. And to show up here and encounter the freeways and the urgency and the rush of adrenaline that's a part of the modern world here in California is a witness to how difficult it is to be aimless. And what I mean by aimlessness in terms of America's racial karma, I mean training ourselves and retraining ourselves not to grasp for, cling to, and attach ourselves to the self-esteem complex. The complex of superiority, the complex of inferiority, or the complex of equality. I was asked a question recently in a talk I did for Leadership Atlanta about equality, and my response individually was, I am not interested in being superior. I am not interested in being inferior, but I am also not interested in being the same as. Each one of us is a unique expression of the mystery of life. Each one of our cultures and heritages and religious and spiritual traditions are unique expressions of the miracle of our human life. And so for me, aimlessness means practicing slowing down enough in our daily life and in our spiritual practice so we can find those places where we're still grasping, whether that's a conscious grasping after superiority or an unconscious grasping after superiority, inferiority, or sameness. If we do not do this work of aimlessness with signlessness and emptiness, the continuation of our racialized consciousness and its suffering will continue in the present moment and will be transmitted to future generations. So cultivating the skills of being in the moment with our bodies and our nervous systems as they react in fear and in fright and in flight to run away from our situation of race or to be numb and unable to feel anything about our racial suffering. And by suffering, I mean the destabilization of the nervous system that occurs in people around race, whether they are the victim, the perpetrator, or the witness. We have all been at some level destabilized, moved away from our capacity to be fully human in the moment. So for me, part of our aimlessness is to take the time to dwell in our body, learn about our nervous system, learn how to create a resilient response to our life, a resilient response to one another, and to understand that the cultivation of these skills is the practice of mindfulness of the body. This is not an intellectual exercise to heal and transform our racial karma here in America. So I've been practicing with the 3 mantras to help me here. The first mantra is to stand up in the house of belonging. Stand up and embody your humanity. Act like we belong here on this planet. I saw a great poster by a young man from Africa a few weeks ago that said, I belong on the earth. And part of this suffering, this tragedy of our racialized consciousness is there's a debate about who belongs on the earth, who has both a right to liveliness, to life, to hope, to care, to love. So stand up and act like a full human being, not an ideological idiot, whatever that ideology might be. We are way beyond what ideology can do for us now. We have to go into the realm of spirituality. Otherwise, our ideologies will keep us confused, competing for that which you understand, I hope, what I'm saying. Contemplating these three doors, entering these three doors again and again, can help these what we realize as we practice to liberate us from the addictions of the three poisons described in Buddhism as greed, hatred, and ignorance or conceit. And again, conceit here means the idea that I am some separate, independent self, not connected to any of life, not sustained by life itself, or all the energies of people and activities that make my life possible, whatever the current state of my life may be. So I want to lead you in a brief meditation. So if you find a place now where you can sit comfortably or lie down comfortably, so take a moment to find that space for yourself in a chair, on the floor, on a bed, whatever is most helpful for you at this moment. And as you place your body there, see if you can feel the sensations of placing your body in a spot. If you're on a cushion or a bed or in a zendo, on a yoga mat, not only feel the sensation of your body moving into that spot, once you're in that spot, see if you can feel the earth under that spot, supporting your chair, supporting your floor, supporting your bed, wherever, so that feel the gravity of earth holding you in place. And now that you're in that spot, settle in to the presence of your whole body in that spot. Your toes, your feet, your ankles, all the way up your calves and your knees and thighs and hips and pelvis and stomach, abdomen, rising and falling. Just be with that rising and falling in your abdomen for a moment. An awareness of your whole torso, your whole chest area, and all the hidden functions of the body at this, keeping you alive, keeping me alive. Sense that heartbeat. Feel the sensation of the lungs. Shoulders relaxing. Neck not holding. Stiff. And an out breath and an out breath. Big out breath. And now, I'm going to invite the bell as we continue. So awareness of the in-breath, embracing the presence of your whole body. Awareness of the out-breath, embracing the presence of your whole body. Breathing in again, recognizing the in-breath, feeling the sensation of the in-breath and resting in your whole body. Just being where you are at this moment. Body aware, body alive. And breathing out, resting in the whole body. And breathing in, let your body remember your encounters with the word race. And breathing out, let your body remember encounters with the word race. And just being with that awareness for a moment. Let the images come by, the memories float by. Be they pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral memories. Don't push them away. Be with them. Let them be present. And breathing in, noticing your in-breath, and what's activated in your body now. How's your nervous system responding to race at this moment? Is there fear activated? Fright activated? Numbness? Disassociation? Sadness? Grief? Just recognize what's activated, what's coming up in your body and mind with race. See if you can name what's activated in you now. Recognizing and naming, an important part of our practice. And now, as the in-breath occurs, see if you can find space in yourself to hold the activation, to hold what came up in this moment. Discovering space in ourselves to hold our experience of life. Breathing in and breathing out, discovering the space within to hold my activation, my discomfort. Now, as you recognize the in-breath, see if you can drop from discovery of space into the equanimity of space within. The space in you that is not clinging, not defending, not attaching, not grasping, just wide space that is wide like the blue sky. Like clouds in the blue sky. Let the clouds come and go, but recognize and name, but don't cling. Resting in equanimity, in stability, deep stability of our hearts and of our minds. And breathing out, touching the wonder of equanimity, the wonder of discovering space in myself I didn't know I had available. And as you breathe in, check in again with your body. Where are you experiencing this sensation of space, this sensation of equanimity? And maybe you're still dealing with the experience of activation. If you are, where is that activation sensed in your body? Where is that in your body? And once you're able to identify where that is in your body at this moment, bring the energy of equanimity and discovery to that space in your body, which means you're bringing the energy of awareness to that space in your body. You're bringing the energy of compassion to that space in your body. And the act of that energy is an act of engagement. It is the ground of healing and transforming our racialized consciousness. And staying with the miracle of your breath, recognizing the in-breath and recognizing the out-breath. Thank you. So I know that we wanted to spend some time with Q&A, so we have time to.
Thank you so much for that practice. That was lovely.
Sure, thank you.
Of course. So everyone, if you have a question, you'll find the Q&A button at the bottom there, and feel free to submit those that way. And for Facebook Live, you can leave a comment just on the video itself. So I'll wait a moment to let some questions come in. All right, there's a question that has come in from Johan on Facebook. And he says, thank you for this, Dr. Ward. Can I ask, do you have any thought on Jiddu Krishnamurti? Thank you.
I am familiar with Krishnamurti. I know of his place and traditions established in Ojai, California. And one of his most profound statements, which is a statement of realization for me, is when we use words to describe one another, other than describing our profound humanity, we create separation between each other. Now, our dilemma is, as a species, language is how we communicate. Language is how we learn. Language is how we do most of our activities, not just us as human, but all species. And so for me, one of the work of our future in terms of deconstructing our racialized consciousness is learning to create language that doesn't keep watering that mental formation well established in our nervous system, in our brains. So I thank Krishnamurti for his insight into how our language can separate us. And, but I think as individuals, and collectively, we have to also understand we have an opportunity to create new language. We're not stuck with the language we've been handed by the colonial past. And I think it's critical that we do that work that Krishnamurti is talking about, but we have to go through it in order to do it. We can't skip over our suffering brought about by language and race. We cannot jump over it. We have to go through it. And if we go through it, like if we enter the gate of the doorways of emptiness, aimlessness, and signlessness, we have a chance. Thanks for a wonderful question.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions coming in. Sue says, in current discussions of race, white people saying, I don't see color, I'm colorblind, is seen as false and excuse-making. Please elaborate on the difference between being colorblind and signlessness. Thank you for a very thought-provoking Dharma talk.
Sure. So first, let me say neurologically, there is no such thing as color blindness. We see. Our visual cortex sees things. And we know from research that from as early, at least, as the age of 2, children can pick out distinctions and recognize differences. And one of my favorite examples is my mother took care of people's children so they could work. Mostly single moms, she took care of their kids so they could work, which means I learned to take care of kids like that. And some of them were young. And one of the 2-year-olds came up to me and asked, "Why are your ears different than hers?" Talking about my mother. And I had never thought that about my ears being different, but as early as 2, human beings can recognize differences. So for me, the problem isn't our differences. The problem is how we interpret our differences, how we understand our differences. So I would not want to live in a colorblind world. What are my azaleas and my roses and the yellow parrots? And I mean, why would I want to live in a world that has no color? That is not our problem. Our problem is we have become attached to defining our human value based on skin tone and what we call color. So for me, there is no such thing as a colorblind society at this moment because we all operate out of color. We still have it on all our forms. It's on when we apply for a job. It's when we try to buy a house. It's in the small print. So, you know, to say that is to be disconnected from what is in fact grounded in our American history. Thanks for that question. I've heard it before. It's a good one.
Thank you. We have another question. This is from Bob. So he quotes, "Everything is connected," and says, "I'm not connected with the homeless or addicts."
Well, that depends on a couple of things when you have an experience like that. It depends on what you mean by I. I want to go first back to the door of emptiness. The point of that door in my practice and my understanding is that we are all breathing the same air. We are all interacting in ways that affect others. So when I go shopping and buy certain things, I'm affecting the whole planet. Homeless, veterans, when I walk by people and act like they're not human beings, I'm still connected. I'm just disassociated from my connection. We've been convinced by the modern world that individualism and our extreme understanding of it is one of the greatest obstacles to the future of this planet, because it means we only see things from an I perspective. And from a Buddhist point of view, this is the heart of our problem, because there is no I. The I experience is a magic show created by our minds, supported by our egos. And so, no, we are connected. So my resources, where are my resources going that are not going to the homeless? I mean, look very practically at your life. So so my connection doesn't mean positive. It can be negative. It can be neutral. But I am still connected to a society that creates that. So it's like when people first start to discover that the thoughts they have are not their individual thoughts, they are society's thoughts that you think are individual. And race is a great example of that. Gender is a great example. Homelessness, the idea that homelessness is not about me, for me, is a disconnection from the economy we create. The principles of economics we decide to live by. So our choices are evidence of our connection, whether we feel that connection, are aware of that connection or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca says, could you please explain more about leaving ideology behind and embracing spirituality? Unfortunately, I don't know what you meant.
Okay. Well, we've grown up in a world for the last several hundred years in which ideas, let me take two of them, the idea of socialism, the idea of communism, the idea of capitalism, these are all human inventions. That's the first thing you have to understand about ideology. I'm not saying anything's bad about ideology. I'm saying ideology is just what it is, a collection of ideas that different people support, quote unquote, believe in, or trust, ways of thinking about the world, ways of thinking about other people. Ideologies have a function of creating a kind of certainty in our minds. And the other aspect of the door of emptiness is impermanence. So when I say getting beyond ideology, I read a great paper by Russell Means, a very important indigenous individual here in American history, who says we must look at our ideologies carefully. So someone was asking him about whether he would choose capitalism or communism, and he was saying neither. And his reasoning had to do with both of those philosophies leave out the earth. And the impact of pursuing either of those directions, separate from the impact on the planet, is one of the dangers of ideology. And so I can make a speech, I can create a slogan, I can get people to follow it, but the question is, are we actually living, and how is our living causing suffering? Back to the comment about homelessness, for example, the economic ideology, which can be found if you study Adam Smith, there's a paragraph in which he says, the American economy should be created so that we worship people who are wealthy. And you can see that. We believe people who are wealthy, we trust people who are wealthy. I'm not saying anything's wrong with wealth. The question of wealth as an ideology, or wealth building as an ideology, is how to create wealth without creating suffering. That, for me, is the question around the ideology of wealth, which we need to understand was the foundation of the colonial enterprise started in the Doctrine of Discovery in Spain in 1500. And if you're not familiar with the Doctrine of Discovery, I recommend you really understand it, because if you do not know what's happening now, nor will you have a clear understanding of what happened in the last 500 years, particularly to non-white peoples of the world and their resources. I just read a great map of Africa and all the resources and the gold and minerals that are still being extracted. You know, there's still countries in Africa paying tax to the colonial empire in Europe. So our ideology, ideology is a dangerous thing unless we understand it's just an idea. And some ideas are good for a certain period of time. Some ideas work in some places. Some ideas don't work in other places. So we must have the maturity to develop what I mean critical intelligence. So this is what I mean of getting beyond ideology. Just take a look at where ideologies have brought us. Look at where they brought the planet, peoples on the planet, species on the planet. The extinction of so much of life forms on this planet are all ideologically based. And so we must get beyond ideas like that and create some new ones without getting caught. that's why spiritual practice is so important. Otherwise, you will have the pattern, which you can see in places around the world, where people who were suppressed, traumatized, in a power shift where they get to be in charge, then they turn out to be exactly the same. They turn out to do exactly the same, to oppress and to traumatize others. So if we don't get beyond ideology and in fact get into neurology, our actual human bodily experience of the world and being together, we will keep creating, we're almost now at the point of suffering that we can't handle globally. And I assure you, I've lived with people all over the world in villages, and they're not thinking about ideology. They're thinking about how to live day to day, how to take care of their families. And so we must get beyond ideologies fundamentally created in the colonial construct and create some new things. The reason spiritual practice is important is when we create new things or change society, we must be clear that our change is also not perfect, that our change will also need to be changed. So this ideology also in many ways is about power. So for me, learning how to understand what it means to be human together without a top-down male-driven structure of our existence, which we have now, and you can see where that's leading, we've ended up with a world that is, what's the phrase, caught in sustainable injustice. No, we have just enough quote unquote things that are working that it's okay for this not to work. And part of what's happening around the world now, especially from a younger generation than I, is they are saying this has got to stop. This is what I mean by getting beyond ideology. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Yoga asks, race, does it only include black and white? What about red and yellow?
Well, no, race, back in the 1700s, and this is in my book, there's a description of one of the scientists who actually created the racial categories. Of course, white was at the top, black was at the bottom, but in between was yellow and red and negative commentaries, stereotypes about all those different skin tones. No, it is not about black and white. It is about every tone. And, you know, there isn't time to go into the tragedy of colorism, but there's also books written on people who are neither this or neither that. And the response to people who don't fit our narrow understanding of how human beings should look or walk or feel or touch or love is tragic. And for me, that, no, it is not black and white. We are politically positioned to think it's about black and white, because that's the fundamental binary of injustice that we've allowed in this country. And if we can get everybody else to think that's okay, we can continue to have that suffering and continue. No, it's not about black and white. It is about much, much more than that. And if you really look at the next level of this, our inability to embrace the whole of our humanity is reflected in our inability to embrace the whole of the planet. These things are doorways into the whole. They are not isolated, independent selves. Thank you.
Christine says, as a white woman, I have always struggled to make my place in the world, to make the same salary as a man, to be listened to as often as a man, so I never thought of myself as privileged. Now I find it hard to hold my oppression along with the oppression felt by Black and brown folks. Thanks.
Thank you for your insight. And this is, see, how would I? So for me, what you're experiencing, you know, in the Buddhist tradition here in the West, in many places, we constantly talk about waking up. But what you are experiencing is waking down, coming down to the daily experience of your own life. And when I come down to the daily experience of my own life, I get to see all of life. And so, yes, it's difficult to embrace. Again, please understand your sense of privilege is collective. It is not just individual. It is like when we have an occurrence of police brutality, which we've had since the beginning of America. It's easy to say this is a bad police officer, rather than reflect on the whole system. So your experience of difficulty with both privilege and recognizing it and white fragility, etc., is also collective. It is not just you. It is a society in you who is experiencing this chaos. And why our spiritual practice is so important, so that we learn in our own bodies, in our own minds, how to handle uncertainty, how to handle difficulty, how to handle pain. To be honest, when I first heard the term white fragility, I started laughing. And I didn't mean that, what's the right way to say that? I didn't laugh because I thought it was funny. I laughed because I had to go somewhere to understand that, different from my own experience of what I've practiced with for 70 years in this country and what I know my ancestors had to go through. And so culturally, I've been practicing with resilience my whole life. It is the only way to survive in this society. So when somebody say, "Oh, I'm uncomfortable talking about race," well, good. It should be uncomfortable, and it will be uncomfortable until we transform our consciousness. And this is discomfort for all of us. I cannot tell you how tired I am in talking about this subject. I have so many other things I want to teach as a Buddhist teacher, but we're stuck here. We're stuck on this channel. And so I wrote the book in the hopes that we can get beyond this channel and create.
Thank you.
There is a temptation in American culture, one more that might help. There is a temptation in American culture to go towards sameness without going through the pain of non-sameness. Don't we all want to be together? We're in the same boat? Well, no, we're not. We're in the same storm, but we're not in the same boats. And that's what people are trying to wake up to, this reality of the system we've created that has resulted in this. You know, human beings did these things. Human beings are doing these things. And for me, that is both good news and bad news. The good news is I have the freedom in my circumstance at this moment not to carry on the pattern of racialized consciousness in myself or in others. But there, you know, most of the world doesn't even have a chance to have the conversations we're having now. They're trying to feed their family. They're looking for the next place they could live. And so even to have the conversation we're having is a kind of privilege that we need to be aware of and take responsibility for. Thank you. I wanted to stop before the gong came out, so.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions.
Oh, okay.
For you. Great. We won't be able to get to everyone, so we're sorry about that. But Ken is asking, Dr. Ward, you talked about slowing down to be attentive to our nervous systems. Can you speak a little more about why this is important for our transformation?
Years ago, I'm in the San Diego area, and a few days ago we were driving and looking around, and we drove by the Salk Institute, Jonas Salk's place, who was a pioneer, as you know, in the polio vaccine. And one of the papers he wrote, he made a comment that the most important work a human being can do today is connected to evolution. So for me, what I mean by this is that we will either evolve a nervous system capable of living on a whole planet with a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of species, or we won't. And right now we aren't in many, many ways. And so our nervous system is still designed in some parts for a world that no longer exists, where our primitive impulses of fight, flight, or flee are still operating, you know, as if we have to look out for saber-toothed tigers and other beasts who might be coming to have us for lunch. And so we need a refined nervous system that is capable of holding the values of care, of cooperation, of learning, of beauty, of joy, of loving. And that will take work. It can be done. And the key phrase here is neuroplasticity. We now know that our nervous systems have always been able to adapt and change. And one of my comments about ideology and getting rigid about our thoughts is it blocks us from changing, from learning, from growing. A friend of mine has a garden I went to recently, and I didn't know this. On the outside of her garden, it says evolve or die. That's why for me, our nervous system work, which I consider to be work of mindfulness of the body, is so important, because we cannot have a new social reality without human beings who are wired enough to handle it. Or we take 2 steps forward and 4 backwards. That's the pattern that we need and can break if enough of us go for it. So there are many resources, or some resources online for training ourselves and understanding and working with our own nervous system. And so I've done that, and I continue. I've been certified in different trauma methodologies. And I think this is so very important. I've been doing this kind of work starting in Cleveland, Ohio, 60 years ago, 55 years ago, and in Chicago, and in Detroit, I mean, around the planet. And I will tell you, and throughout the South, I will tell you the number one obstacle to breaking through our racial catastrophe is trauma training. Every group I've ever worked with, wherever they were, the entire process of healing and transformation stopped because people weren't capable of handling what came up in them while we were talking about race. And that is still our situation, even though more and more people are moving into understanding the skills and practices of how to be wise in interacting with our own body's response to our life at this moment, the pandemic life, the racial reckoning life, the healthcare system life. So we need training and enhancement of our nervous system. If we continue to go through the world, wherever we are, just reacting to what happens, we will get what we've got.
Thank
And
you.
there is a trauma training class on our website called the Earth Gate. I thought I just mentioned that. I almost forgot. But yeah, that's to me fundamental. I cannot tell you how many groups and meetings and retreats and conferences I've been in on race, and it all gets stopped at the point of being able to handle what comes up in us as you have the conversation. The fear that comes up, the anger that comes up, the disappointment, the sadness, the grief. So in addition to that resiliency training must include learning how to do grief work, which is not a high skill in America, to deal with grief, to embrace grief, and especially to look how we might approach that collectively. Because again, back to the notion of being individuals, if we stay there, we cannot heal and transform our collective grief, which lives inside of us, inside of all of us. Thank you for that question.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
And at the beginning, Doreen said, "Love the opening poem. Did you write it, and where can I find it?"
Yes, I wrote it. And I have some friends, poems just kind of happen and I make a note, but I have friends who are putting the collections of poems together for me. But I can send a copy to Tricycle. Is that okay? And then that way it's available for anybody who's interested.
Absolutely.
But I hope to have a poetry book out maybe next year.
Wonderful. Well, we are towards the end of our time. I just want to thank everyone for joining us again. And for anyone who wants to continue reading, on Tricycle's website just today, we published an article of question and answer with Dr. Ward. So I'm going to put that link in the chat. But I just wanted to thank everyone for joining, and thank you so much for leading us today in this practice and in this expansion of our thoughts.
Well, thank you for your leadership of the session, and all of you who have participated or are participating. Please take good care of yourselves.